Okay, guess what? We're here. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to you if you're new around here today. Thanks to everyone else. And I really mean thanks to everyone else. If you were listening last week and you were one of the people who sent me a note of support, or even if you didn't send me a note, even if you just took a moment to have a kind thought for my daughter or for me, I can't thank you enough. I genuinely felt supported. I feel so grateful for this show and for the fact that people would listen and care. It really helped. Thank you. And we had good days and bad days this week. I think overall, I feel a little better. I feel at least like, I don't know, we're on a road. And as a friend of mine said this week, it's perhaps going to be a bumpy road, but at least it feels like I'm on a road as opposed to falling down the side of the cliff off the side of the road like it felt like for a couple weeks. It's amazing how quickly things can change or shift, and also how adaptable we can be when you don't have a choice, you know? So, in any case, I'm hanging in there, and you helped me this week, so thanks a lot. And speaking of the adaptability of human beings, my guest today is Kathryn Bruni-Young. And, long-time listeners, you might remember Kathryn's mom, Diane, was part of the earliest iteration of this show. She was one of the first, and she was a very significant guest on the show for me personally. Not just for the show and like what I could see possible with it, but just personally with me as a person and a practitioner, even though I did not know her very well at all, barely, she had a big impact on me. And I've certainly been following Kathryn's work, and the moment came together for us to connect and have a conversation, not just about her mom, but about the adaptability of the human body and strength training. And it was a very significant conversation for me on a lot of levels. And I'm just very happy to be sharing it with you today. Real quick, before we do that, I want to take a moment to express my gratitude to Podcast Premium subscribers. Specifically today, Amy Bartle and Anna Walton. Thanks, Amy and Anna. We really appreciate you and all the others who are supporting the show with their premium subscriptions. If you're new around here and you want to have access to the full archives, or you also want to help support this show, the way to do that is become a Podcast Premium subscriber. It's choose your rate. You cancel at any time. If you don't have any money, you can just email us and we will definitely give you a free account if you want to listen to the old episodes. But if you do have even just a little bit of something, it definitely makes a difference. And we are grateful. To learn more about becoming a Podcast Premium subscriber, along with all the other stuff I do, I've got ongoing practice and discussion that you can participate in if you want to connect in ways more than just listening here. To find out about all of that, go to jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. I think that's fine for now. I will touch base with you on the other side. But I'm very excited for you to hear this, so let's get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Kathryn Bruni-Young. Hello?
Hello.
Hello, Kathryn.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Okay, hold on. I'll turn my camera for a second. Do you like to keep the cameras on?
It doesn't. When I record, I usually don't keep the cameras on.
Yeah.
But either way.
It's funny. It's interesting that you say that because if it's up to me, I tend to not have them on, but a lot of guests in the past have wanted them on recently. So I don't really mind. It's up to you. You want to turn them off? Or you want to leave them on?
I don't know. I guess I'll turn it off. I always record with it turned off. So I feel like
let's go that way.
I'll be in the zone.
I think it's funny you say that because I feel same way too. Sometimes when the cameras aren't on, I feel like I listen a little better. That might just be me because there's a certain amount of energy that goes into the visual or the video or something.
Yeah, totally.
In any case, I'd like to think that we just begun. Is that okay with you? I don't want it to be a surprise.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. I'm really glad to get a chance to speak with you. I know we've exchanged notes over the years, but we've never really met. So it's good to meet you. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. Yeah,
my pleasure. Thanks for reaching out.
Well, I was wondering, I was sitting here just now. I'm always trying, how this is when you have a podcast, how do you start it? Where do you start? And I was just sitting here thinking about, how my day's been and how I was thinking back when I talked to your mom 2 years ago, and then I've moved into a much slower paced life. And then I was thinking, I wonder how Kathryn's day was going. And then I remembered, you moved to a more rural place too recently. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I moved out here. I moved away from Toronto. I think it was 6 years ago now.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, it was 5.5 that I moved. So yeah. So you did it before I did it, but it's been a while. Time's gone kind of crazy over the last few years.
Yeah, it has been a while, but I feel like I've settled into the country life so quickly. And so it almost feels like I've always been here.
I see. Well, how was your day? What's a day like these days for you?
Well, Friday is a day that I've typically been booking off because we're working on Saturdays right now. So I don't have a lot going on Fridays. So we brought our dog out for his daily play date with our friend's dog. So we stood around in their backyard for almost an hour and watched our dogs rip around in the snow and, just run circles around us and have a little bit of outside time, and came home, had lunch. My husband Kyle's actually working away. He's editing podcasts right now, but I have a pretty relaxed feeling day, which is really nice.
Nice that he's doing the editing and you don't have to do it. Well, I know also, if I recall, before the pandemic, you were traveling all over the place like I was, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah, so that was a huge change. And part of the reason why I could move away from Toronto and live in a really rural area is because so much of my work was starting to go online. And then I was traveling so much and feeling like, I don't really need to be in the city anymore. And then 2 years ago, I stopped traveling and definitely had a moment of whoa, what am I going to do? But then other things just kind of cropped up, and yeah, now it's so interesting. After 2 years, it feels like this is it's always been this way, but it absolutely has not.
Well, you had already started online some like I had before. Everybody had to, so we had a bit of a head start, maybe at least. And I guess over the time of everybody having to go online, we did develop stuff where you can kind of don't have to travel in the same way that we did before, I guess.
Yeah. And that stuff has been, I really realized how many more things I could be doing online when all of this started. I already had a membership, but it was small. It was not very high tech. I was just kind of filming classes in my little studio with people there in the room and putting those classes on the internet. And it was kind of low maintenance. And then we had so much time at home. So we turned the membership into more of a high-tech thing. But it was also around that time that I realized maybe I'll teach a 8-week pull-up program. from home. And maybe people would do that with me online. And then all of a sudden, all of these people started signing up for those types of programs. And I was just like, holy moly, had it not been for the pandemic, like I probably wouldn't have had the energy to host something like that and to take it on. But I also might, not have even just known that that would have been a thing that would be like great for me and also great for all the other people in our community as well. So it really changed the way that I do my work. Like this being at home and online for the last 2 years has, even changed the style that I teach in, the way that we deliver stuff, and not just like digitally, but I used to teach mostly 60-minute flow classes with a little weight or a band here and there. And now we're teaching like 16 class strength progressions, and people are doing them from their living rooms. It's been so interesting.
That is really interesting. I think the live two-way meetings brought a whole new element. Like it was one thing when you were just like making videos and then putting them up, or even doing one-way streams, which I did for a while, where it's just you in front of a camera. But once it could get sort of two-way, and people embraced that, and people had left their cameras on or whatever, and you could engage with them, that I think opened up some of what we were doing in person for people to be remote. Like they don't have to be where you are, and you can actually connect with people who would want to connect with you that normally couldn't, which is when the internet is good, And it's interesting what you're saying about the different programs that you started offering and feeling like you didn't have to have it be like something you were slipping into a flow class, but that you could just bill it as, all right, we're doing strengthening now. But you were calling it mindful strength for a long time. It wasn't like you weren't already focused on that, but it's interesting. And I don't know if this is true for you. I know that for me, one of the things that's happened in the pandemic is some of the pressure to feel like I need to like fit into like the market pressures or something went away. Cause like the people showing up and subscribing, like you're saying, and joining your membership clubs, like they just want what you're interested in. You didn't have to like sell them with a flow. You just offer them what you really want to offer. And they were into that, It was almost like I didn't feel the same pressures that I felt before to have to give power flows anymore or something.
Yeah, it definitely feels more like low stakes for me, because I'm like here at home. I have the studio that we film in my home. And it all started out because I was like stressed out last winter. And I started doing handstands again because they were like fun and exciting. And I like needed, a little bit of that in my life. And I started doing handstands, and I posted a video on Instagram of me doing a handstand with like jokingly asking like, should we do a handstand club? Like who wants to come have fun with me? And then I got all of these like messages and emails and DMs. And then I just thought, you know what? Why not try this? Like I'm here at home with my empty studio and a camera, and nobody has to travel, and I don't have to book a flight and a hotel room and hope that 30 people sign up. Well, like it just felt so low stakes. I was just like, okay, I'll try this. And then all of a sudden, all these people started signing up for it. And I was like genuinely surprised. I knew some people would sign up for it, but I was genuinely surprised in how much interest there was. And like, I mean, as you know, when you go somewhere international and you teach a workshop, I have always felt a little bit of a need to like conform to the ideas of the studio and like not push the envelope too far. And like the studio is booking flights for me. And like there's just all of these outside things happening that just don't seem to be a factor when I'm like live streaming classes essentially from my living room.
Well, that's really interesting too, because I know someone who was in your handstand club or whatever, and they loved it. And they were not someone I would have thought who would be in your handstand club. And I think it's partially because you weren't conforming to teaching it in ways that you might have taught it at other times, that you felt free to teach it however you would be doing it yourself at home or whatever it was. I don't know. I wasn't in the club, but what do you think? Was there something different about the way that you were offering it without those pressures on you?
Well, Handstand Club was so great because we actually had time. Like it was a 16 class progression. This happened over the course of 2 months. We met twice a week for 2 months. So there's no need to try to like get it all in at once or like make sure that people can do something after a 2-hour workshop or something like that. Like there's time. You can like break it down. But there was also, I think, I think we got the expectation management like right on point with Handstand Club. Like everyone knew they were signing up to do 2 months of nothing but handstand training. And I think that I was also stressed out at that time. That was like right after my mom had died. So I had a lot going on and I just kind of like let loose a little bit. And I was just like not really that worried about like exactly what I was saying and like, is this going to really make sense for every single person here? And like, is this always the most accessible option? I was just kind of like, we're here to do handstands and have a good time. So let's just do that. And I think people were into it.
Yes. Well, you've made a couple of good points in there. One, this idea of spreading it out over time. I basically took what was like a 12-hour weekend workshop I was doing and turned it into a year-long program. And it's amazing when you give yourself that time to just not have to like pack it all into a neat package for a 3-hour workshop to 60 people that you never met before, like you were describing.
Yeah.
And it is the expectations, the expectation management thing. That's everything. If everybody's showing up for the right reason and they get what you're exploring, then you don't feel that same pressure, right?
100%. I remember one time in Handstand Club, someone was like, my wrist, this and that is feeling sore or whatever when I put my hands on the floor. And I was just like, okay, like, let me help you try to maybe give you a couple options here. But like also you signed up for a handstand class. So like, this is kind of what we're doing. And I think having that like really specific goal, really like just helped keep me on track with what we were doing and not get too sidetracked, but also just like motivated everyone else and kept them moving along. And like by the end of Handstand Club, almost no one could do a handstand because as many people know, it's going to take more than 8 weeks to build that much strength and skill. But like all of the other tools that people had built were so powerful and they could really all feel and notice that. And that made a huge difference. Like one thing that we taught in that program that I would never do in a studio workshop was at the end of our Saturday classes, we all did 50 push-ups together. And
I want you to know my friend did get up in her handstand. She did. She built it up and she didn't think she was going to, and she did.
She did. Yes. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, what it makes me think of? I had Greg Lehman on some while back.
Yes.
And I know you know him well. And like the whole idea of like being a movement optimist, that's what makes me think of a little bit when you're dealing with, if you're doing a handstand workshop, that's probably the right attitude to be taking, Well, the other thing that you mentioned that I appreciate you mentioning is that your mom passed. And I was getting ready to talk to you and I looked back and, your mom was episode 25 out of this will be episode 315.
Wow.
And it was in July of 2016.
Okay.
And unlike almost all of the podcasts I've recorded over the last several years, it was recorded in person. Your mom, for whatever reason, was coming into Brooklyn, and I guess we had mutual friends, and she had emailed me, and she came and took my class, and then we sat together in the center after class and recorded the podcast, and then we went out to dinner afterwards. And your mom, I didn't really know her outside of that conversation, really, in contacts we had after that. But she really was one of the early people who was like sounding the alarms about stuff that were happening in yoga classes. And even myself, who had made a lot of changes and certainly moved in like what I would call more therapeutic orientation. And still, like in 2016, when I talked to your mom and she told us the story about how essentially her body fell apart. And, you know, a lot of it she attributed to like hip opening emphasis she made so she could sit in meditation without having pain in her knees. And then all of a sudden one day her hip just kind of tore apart. And it wasn't because of what she did in the moment, but because of years of what she wasn't doing, or because of the kind of conditioning she was doing on her body caught up with her.
Yeah.
And she was one of the first like Ashtanga people I was knowing who was saying, hey, this like strict Ashtanga is hurting people's bodies. And I, at the time, was a little bit in denial. Even what I was doing was still not so good for my body. And within the year after speaking to her, my body totally fell apart. Completely. And, you know, some of the big takeaways from that conversation for me when I think back on it was basically like, we need to question some of the things we've been doing in yoga classes. I remember her talking about strengthening your glutes. Because I was one of those people who was taught to like not engage your glutes in your back bends.
Right.
And your mom was like, you got to engage your glutes. And I started engaging my glutes after that. But even more than that, she had started, if I'm not mistaken, exploring like Axis syllabus and like doing that body wrapping stuff. And the biggest takeaway was, hey, everybody, listen, you can't just do more and more yoga asana and think that you're going to get everything you need. And I didn't totally believe it yet at that time. I was still kind of in this idea that you could get everything you needed from it on some level.
Yeah.
But when everything fell apart, it was really clear that that wasn't true.
And how did you know that things were falling apart for you? Like, what was that like?
Just pain. I couldn't move.
Pain.
Massive pain, and you just can't fake it, you know? And not wanting to be a fraud, you know?
Yeah.
And I would say some of my pain issues were, again, like I had stopped doing a lot of the things that were harmful to me, but I wasn't doing things that I needed to do, which is kind of where you went, right? You were, I heard you say that in an interview, which I thought was a very interesting thing of kind of like thinking, oh, the yoga poses are bad. And then realizing, no, actually, if you were also doing other things to support it, they're not necessarily bad.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I don't think my mom or I had that nuance and had that context, you know, many years ago, probably when she did that interview with you initially. I don't think we had, you know, totally come to that place yet. I think at that point we were very much still in the like, these hip openers are going to like mess everybody up. And
they
like,
were, that's the truth. That's the thing.
You know?
Yeah.
But I guess I question if they were, I guess I question, is the Ashtanga practice actually harmful, or is it the way in which it's done? You know,
I've come to that too. It's not necessarily the forms in and of themselves, but because you could do them in a way that weren't harmful. It's maybe the way they're being done. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I mean, stretching is not bad for your body, but like sometimes when you only do certain stretches for like, you know, 10, 20, 25 years, like things start to feel not so good anymore. And yeah, we used to really believe that was the stretches problem. And I guess now I'm just like, well, had I been doing heavy weightlifting while I had been doing Ashtanga, would I have ever gotten injured? Would my mom have gotten injured? Like, maybe. I don't know, obviously, but I would guess probably not.
We certainly it would be more balance to it and less likely, that's for sure. I guess I'm curious, you know, I think back and your mom took us through the whole story of how, you know, she met Richard Freeman and became this Ashtanga person, like one of the first Ashtanga teachers in Canada. And then eventually she like became the rogue and departed from it and had another center. Yeah. I don't know where you land in that. Like when are you old enough to start kind of practicing with your mom in that like journey of hers along that? When do you remember what center, what did she have? I don't know how old you are or even when you might've come into that story.
Oh man, I used to go when I was like a toddler, I used to go with my mom, and she would go teach her classes, and I would like sit in the corner of the classes and just like sit there and like play with a little toy and just watch the whole thing go down. And so that's how it started. And then I used to go with her to workshops with Richard Freeman. Like as a 10-year-old, I would like have my own little mat in Richard Freeman's workshop, and I would be like doing some of the poses, but like not loving it at the same time. And then just kind of sitting down and like watching him do his thing and just kind of observing the whole situation. And then when I was in high school, I really fell in love with the Ashtanga practice. Like I had been doing gymnastics and dance and different types of those sports as a younger kid. And then it was when I was in high school when I didn't really want to be involved in sports anymore, but like Ashtanga was like this very sport-like movement practice, and my mom was really into it. And so that's when I really started practicing a lot. I did teacher training when I was like in grade 11, and then I started teaching a class for other teenagers at one of her studios, and I taught that class for 4 years. And then they finally let me start teaching classes for the grown-ups and just like regular classes as well. But I was so involved in her work ever since I was a little kid, and always just so like interested and intrigued. And we'd like go to these workshops and I'd just be like, whoa, this is so interesting.
Well, I know I've heard you mention you did end up starting to have like pain in your knees or whatever. Was that before or after your mom's hip fell apart?
Yeah. So I think it was a little bit after. I think my mom had that massive hip injury, and then she started doing rehab and doing all different types of movements, but I was still really into the vinyasa practice at that point. And then it was so random. Like at that point, I hadn't really accepted the fact that like I was in an injury state. Like, yeah, I had a lot of knee pain and back pain. And I remember my mom and I would be like driving home from yoga classes on Tuesday nights, like after her advanced class, and my lower back would literally be in a spasm. And I'd be like shifting around in my seat and be like, oh, my lower back's kind of weird. And she'd be like, well, just like do this stretch, or like we had no idea, right?
I know.
Like zero.
That's what I mean. I was like that when I talked to your mom in 2016 I had all these things going in my body, but I wasn't really being honest about it or something.
Yeah, just like had no idea. So that was happening. Then out of nowhere, I had a friend and he was over at the house one day and he was like, there's this teacher. His name is Ido Portal. He travels around the world. He's just starting to get popular. If this guy ever comes to Toronto, you should go take his workshop. And I was like, okay, I'll keep that in mind. And then like a couple weeks later, this teacher was in Toronto teaching a workshop at the CrossFit gym close to my house. And of course, I had never been to the CrossFit gym or anything like that. But I signed up to go to this workshop, and it was only a 2-hour workshop. It was like, I don't know, like a handstand workshop or something like that. And it was in that first workshop that things started to click for me, because he was talking about strengthening, preparation, progressive overload, novel movements, doing different things, not just doing the same thing over and over again for years and years. And that's when the wheels started to turn for me, where I realized like I had always felt like such a strong vinyasa practitioner. Like I could do so many strong movements and felt, quite empowered by that. And then I went to this workshop at the gym and I was like, I can't do any of this stuff. Like, what the heck? Like, I thought this practice was like preparing me to be like strong and then when I stepped into the gym, that strength did not carry over at all. And that's when I started to consider that like, ooh, maybe there's some gaps in what I'm doing. And then it was after that I started to, I think, acknowledge that like, I'm having a lot of pain and like I'm having a lot of spasms and like things are not feeling good. And then I look around at all my friends and a lot of them had the similar things going on. So I think I also started to realize like, whoa, like this feeling that I'm feeling has also been totally normalized in this community. Like everyone's got knee pain and everyone's got back pain and everyone's got hamstring pain and all of these things, but we haven't quite figured out like how to move forwards yet. Like back then, all of my teachers were like, well, just modify everything. Just here's a block. Don't push yourself so hard. You're doing too much. You're too ambitious. And then I started going to the gym and they told me the exact opposite. They were like, whoa, bro, you need to like load yourself up. Like you need to do some strength training. And I was just like, what? Everyone's been telling me to rest. Like what? It was complete paradigm shift for me.
Wow. Well, I mean, so interesting that you mentioned Ido Portal. I was going to ask you about him because I've watched like videos of him. It's so interesting. Did you end up doing more study with that stuff after that workshop?
I did. And I'm not in touch with him anymore. Mm-hmm. But I do have to acknowledge that like he was the first one who really got the wheels turning for me. I did quite a lot of study with him over the next 2 years. Like we actually hosted his workshop at Downward Dog at my mom's studio. Like I did a lot with him. He really motivated me and inspired me. And, you know, his method doesn't work for everyone. I don't even think I would necessarily recommend it.
That's interesting that you say that because I wasn't going to ask about that, but like I watched those videos and it's like people jumping up on railings and stuff. I mean, it looks cool and fun. And like, even just like using the tennis ball against the wall and like different kind of things. I could see how there'd be all kinds of different applications, but what are what were some of you listed some things before when you talked about the workshop. Yeah. Are those the things that are like your big takeaways from that kind of work? Like just opening up the scope and like of what's possible and like variation of movement, or what were your big takeaways from him? Yeah.
So back then, what he was teaching, I think was a bit more simple than what he's teaching now. So back then, those initial workshops were like, just like progression classes. So like, okay, we're going to start with this movement, and then we'll progress to this, then to this, then to this, and different people would, you know, continue progressing. And I, for example, would like stop on the second progression and just like work there for a long time and eventually start to move on. He was teaching a lot about like joint preparation. So like different ways of loading your joints to actually start to build strength and resilience in your joints in different positions, where I had been taught to just like do good alignment and like just make sure everything's stacked up nicely and everything's going to be fine. So then I got his approach, which was like, no, like go out of alignment and like train your body to do that and be strong in that and be resilient in that. And I was just like, holy shit, I think I need more of this kind of attitude. It was stuff like that. He was also back then, you know, really into just like basic gymnastic strength training, which I really liked. Lots of novelty, lots of crawling. I think, and I don't know if he really came up with this, but at that time, the idea of like not being a specialized movement person was also becoming popular. Like before then, a lot of people were quite specialized. And then this idea of becoming more of like a generalist when it comes to movement practice was starting to become popular. I think also as like CrossFit became popular, that started to come through a little bit more. And that was really interesting for me because I had never really considered like training in different modalities at the same time, like on purpose, like for a reason. I figured, if I'm going to be dedicated, I'll do this one thing over and over.
Interesting. I mean, that makes me think, because I think it was like not very long after I spoke to your mom that she started, what was that, like Facebook group that was movement research, yoga movement research? What was it called? I'm sorry, I don't remember. I think
the yoga and movement research community.
Yes. Something like that. And that kind of got huge for a minute there.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, because you weren't alone in that feeling.
Oh, yes.
Right? There was a lot of teachers out there who are like, wait a second, and exploring different ways of moving and realizing the limitations of some of the systems that they had been doing for a lot of years.
Yeah. And I think finally acknowledging like the dogmatic beliefs that were behind those systems that were supposed to be teaching about like mindfulness and liberation, right? But we're like all like in this little cage, and like if we go out of this position or if we add this to our practice, we're like not good practitioners anymore. Like I think that group was so powerful because it wasn't just about the movements. It was it was about deconstructing these gigantic ideas, like no one should squeeze their glutes, or like, you know, like it's wild. Can you imagine? Like, do you remember what it was like?
I was taught that.
Follow instructions like that, Jay. Like, it's wild.
And it's interesting that you say that too. That in the same way that like doing physical practices always has more to do with just its physicalities because you're a human being. It seems like when you guys opened up that group and you created a space for people to feel free to question and to explore different ways of moving, a lot of it did have to do with reconciling those relationships to gurus and those traditions, you know, because a lot of people were deeply enmeshed for so long and careers are wrapped up in it and everything. So it was a real unraveling time. And I remember that Facebook group was like a real, and then it even kind of got haywire, if I recall. And then Facebook pulled some shit on your mom. I remember like it got hairy there for a bit, if I remember.
Yeah. I mean, also my mom was like stirring the pot pretty good. Like,
she liked to do that, didn't she? Yeah, I love that about her. She did not pull any punches, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I guess, you know, I want to get back to what you were talking about movement stuff. I want to get back there, but I do also, you know, when I spoke to your mom, she had specifically mentioned how she had been through cancer and she was cancer-free in that moment. And, you know, I think I mentioned in an email to you that my mom had been through cancer and didn't have her cancer come back within 7 years, but then she ended up contracted leukemia, which she passed from. And I don't even really know if I just wasn't in your mom's loop anymore, not paying attention, but it seemed like the reemergence of her cancer and her passing happened very quickly. Did I have that wrong?
It happened over the course of about 2 years.
Okay.
But I can't remember if she was talking about it as much online. Like, yeah, because I think a lot of people also had that same idea. I think a lot of people were very surprised, very shocked when they found out that she had died. And yeah, for people who were like, you know, really close to our family and like not just on the internet, but like in real life, I think weren't surprised because her health definitely deteriorated quickly, but still over the course of, I think around 2 years.
Well, let me just express my condolences to you. Like I said, I was one of those people who were surprised because, like you said, she wasn't talking about it online, and rightly so. You know, like I said, Facebook kind of turned ugly for a while there, and I remember her getting attacked for stuff, and I just remember her dealing with lots. Like she was stirring it up, but having to spend a lot of energy into that, I imagine. Yeah, and I think when her health really started to get bad, it was also like we were in this like new pandemic world, and the internet just kind of changed a little bit. And I think she just started to pull back from posting about things online. Yeah. Well,
thank you.
I mean, I have to say that when I look at the work you're doing now, and I mentioned I have a friend who's been she did your handstand and then she moved on to the other ones, the pull-up ones too, I think. When I look at the work you're doing now, it really does feel like an honoring of what your mom's work was. And I hope it's okay for me to say that to you, because it does feel like I said, your mom sounded this alarm, you know, and a lot of us heard it And it required us to seek new tools. And it seems like that's really what you've said about doing, is providing new tools. I imagine you're just doing it for yourself. You have your own journey, but you said earlier, you were very kind of around and involved in what your mom's work was. And do you think of your work as a continuation of her work, or just your work, or how do you
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. My mom was such a big part of my work. Like everything I did, I would consult with her, or she would be there, or she would like come to the workshop, or like she was so involved with everything. And I think had she not been that type of leader who was like, talking really honestly about what her experience had been like and challenging these systems of power in our own little community. Like, had I not grown up with her being that type of teacher, I don't know, how my work would have evolved. I don't know if I would have had that type of confidence to start to question, like, what are we actually doing here? And how could I maybe be serving this community in a different way? And like, I don't know if I would have been able to change my practice as much as I did, but still feel connected to yoga for as long as I did. And so, my work is really different now than hers was. And it's definitely going into this new world of strength training, which like she was not a part of. But I think from a philosophical perspective.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.